Alrighty folks, and welcome to the Chronicle Podcast channel. This is episode 48, Wu Zetian in Power. So in today's episode, we will continue the story of Empress Wu Zetian and examine her hold on power as she governs behind the curtain, so to speak. And then, of course, when her husband Tao Gaozong died in the year 660, she installed two of her sons to power as emperors, and she kind of ruled over them, but we'll get to that later on. And then, eventually, she took the ultimate step and declared herself Emperor of China, and even declared a new dynasty called the Zhou. And what's interesting about her declaration and the name that she used is that what she did was she created a new character for the word Zhou. And then it was like to symbolize it was like a new era, a new time of prosperity, and all of these things. Now, I am excited to announce that Alyssa from the Remember the Ladies podcast has accepted my invite to chat with her over Empress Wu over the next coming weeks. So what we will focus on is more than likely Empress Wu's controversial rise to power, her social impact on China, and what I mean by that is the role of women and how it changed, and things like that. And of course, we'll be looking at her legacy as well. And in today's episode, what I'm kind of going to focus on more than anything is like the political side of things, the military or foreign policy that Wu Zetian pursued, as well as like economic policies and things, and like her life in the imperial court, more or less. Okay, so I'm going to focus on everything else apart from the social impact, and the reason why is because I want to save the topic for when I speak to Alyssa about it. Now, in order to get into this, I just need to pedal back slightly and give a brief overview of what happened in the last episode. So, of course, you've got Concubine Wu, then Empress Wu, and apparently to get there, she killed her own daughter, framed her two rivals within the harem for the murder, whilst accusing them of witchcraft, something I forgot to mention last week. A doll of what was supposed to be Concubine Wu had lots of needles stuck into it, that kind of voodoo kind of thing. And it was, of course, found in Empress Wang's chambers, which was then thrown in with the accusations against her. And of course, she gets killed along with the other rival to power. And they meet a gruesome end. And then this is when Empress Wu becomes the Empress. And this is why I pedaled back, because the question here is, how did she gain more influence within the Tang court then? Because remember, this is a very, very patriarchal society, and Confucian values are entrenched within the aristocracy. So it's amazing, you could even say that was Wu Zetian's biggest achievement, even just becoming empress. But, we'll get into, what she does when she's there anyway. So, the first reason is that Emperor Tang Gaozong, he wasn't really a bad ruler or anything like that, but he did lean on his wife for a lot of advice for affairs within the court. And of course, this creates this power dynamic between the empress and the emperor, because she's the one that's coming up with the policies, and a lot of people within the court see that. And then, of course, the second is that the court became divided because of her role within it. And as time went on, Empress Wu actually begun attending court with the emperor, which wasn't supposed to happen, unless it was, of course, he was naming the heir and it was her son, something like that. And then, of course, she started speaking on the emperor's behalf, which is another big no-no. Well, it's supposed to be anyway. Now, some ministers, as you could imagine, were completely horrified by this. And one in particular was a man by the name of Jiang Wuji. He was very outspoken against the Empress and how she was betraying Confucian values, betraying traditions, and this is where you get this, these two reasons that I've mentioned, for her rise to power, they begin to intertwine, because you have one side, and let's just call them conservatives, They don't believe that women should be wielding any political power at all, and they are very unhappy with what they are seeing unfold in front of their eyes. Then you have, let's call them, the progressives within the court. They support Wu Zetian and don't really care for her gender, as long as she does govern the country effectively. Now, I must say, I can't really fault either side within the court here. The conservatives are just wanting to follow tradition, and here is a person challenging these traditions, and I can't help but think that I shouldn't be judging them by today's standards, as it's unfair to do so. Because remember, like, we're used to seeing women leaders all the time. Like, I mean, in Scotland, we've got a women leader right now, Nicola Sturgeon. And of course, it's just like we're kind of used to seeing women as leaders, and it's a very good thing. And we see them in positions of power. Whereas back then, especially in China, and in fact, even in China today, you don't see women politicians. And it's like you could see how these values are so deeply entrenched within Chinese society. And here you have a woman who is, talking about policies. And a lot of these people just want to follow the traditions with the way it's always been. And, she's breaking these traditions and she's like doing it quite well, which is another thing that I think probably annoyed them. However, like on the flip side of that, there is this faction who actually supported her. And it goes to show that some men within the court were willing to see changes to Chinese court culture, and by extension, Chinese society. Now, this is where we have other problems, because some people, like people afterwards, are like scholars, particularly Confucian scholars, they'll argue that these people only supported her because she was going to kill them. And there is some evidence to back it up. Like, it's no secret that Wu Zetian, in her rise to power, and even when maintaining power, she did kill a lot of people. Well, a lot of people were killed on her pursuit for power. To give you an example, like hundreds of members of the Li family, so that's like the dynasty, they were all killed by her orders. So again, it just goes to show like she was willing to get rid of any rival to her power. And of course, there's another example, like the minister who I spoke of earlier, Jansung Wuji, he eventually gets caught up and he rubs the Empress the wrong way a little too much. She then accuses him of treason and then has him exiled, and then from there, like, she gives him, like, it's either wine or tea, can't remember what it is exactly, and basically says drink it, but everyone knows it's actually poison, and he obliges. So like what I'm trying to say is like, because like, I mean, if I was there, like with my mindset, I would definitely be on the progressive side. But like, I'm just saying, like, we have to reflect on our own biases when we're diving into this, because like immediately we go, oh, they're terrible people because they're judging her because she's a woman. And yeah, like by today's standards, it is terrible, but we just need to remember that when we go back to that time, like, this is a woman who's breaking traditions, and some people, they even today, they don't like traditions being broken. So I'm just trying to like remember that when we go forward. But anyway, you have a divided court, an emperor who can't govern effectively, and like again, a part of the reason why is because he does suffer that stroke, and he does get unwell a lot, which then means that he has to lean on his wife. And this leaves a perfect opportunity for said wife to strengthen her faction within the court and get rid of her enemies. And that's exactly what she does. And then, of course, when Emperor Gaozong died in the year 683, it was his son with Wu Zetian, Li Zhi, who then became the new emperor, named Emperor Zhongsong. However, his reign was a complete sham and didn't even last a year. And that's because his mother had him removed and replaced by his younger brother Li Dan, who became Emperor Ruizong. And what's weird is that both brothers will be appointed by their mother, then removed from their mother, then reinstated after their mother steps down. But for all purposes here, we shall just focus on the first reigns of each of them. So the first one, Zhongsong, he came to the throne to rule the realm, and very quickly tried to reign himself without his mother's influence. And that's, of course, a big no-no, especially when mummy wants all the power. And normally this is when, the young son would probably just get a slap in the wrist and say, oh, remember who put you here, kind of thing. But instead what happened was she just simply removed him and then trumped up some treason charges against him, and he was exiled far, far away. The second son, Ruizong, was then crowned emperor, only to be locked away safely deep within the palace, and nobody was allowed to see him, and then that's when Wu Zetian would rule the Tang court herself. And then eventually she did take the ultimate step and declared herself Huang Di in the year 690. She proclaimed a new Zhou dynasty, and then it ended with her as well. And the official histories don't really count this new dynasty, or this interregnum period, as one might call it, as a new dynasty. And the reason why, again, is because it's supposed to go through male bloodlines, and this is a woman who was married into the Li family, and then she declared a new dynasty, but when she died, the Li family took over again anyway, so it's kind of like, well, we're still the Tang, basically. But anyway, now that she was empress, what'd she do? And I'm going to mention three things, like I said before. So it's going to be like the expansion of the empire and foreign policy, the spread of Buddhism, and reforms for the people and government. So let's go on with the first thing then, which is of course expansion. Wu Zetian did this when she was ruling in all but name, and when she proclaimed her new dynasty as well. But I do like this summing up of her rule by author Ni Yapeng in her book Feminist Thinking in Late 7th Century China, a critical hermeneutics analysis of the case of Wu Zetian. She said, quote, "During the 50 years under her governance, the state won many battles against other countries, consolidated and expanded its territory, and prospered more than ever before in agriculture and economy." End quote. And that's just a beautiful statement, because that sums up her reign. And it highlights that Wu Zetian was an extremely effective politician and leader of the time. Like, forget the fact that she's a woman, like, she seems to be a capable politician and things like that, and she was able to meander her way through around in a very dangerous world, especially because she was a woman. But for now, let's just focus on the expansion part here. So what did she do to actually expand the empire? Well, one achievement is, like, and this one can actually trump over Tang Taizong, like basically the founder of the Tang, let's be honest. The second emperor of the Tang dynasty, Li Shimin, by all accounts, she organized a campaign which finally defeated the Goguryeo in the Korean peninsula in the year 668, whereby the entire region became a vassal state to the Tang dynasty. And this is a huge achievement, considering that, Li Shimin, the great military strategist and basically the founder of the Tang, had a lot of trouble doing. And this was like a huge contribution that Wu Zetian made for the state. However, traditional sources do give all of the credit to her husband, Tang Gaozong. And again, this is coming into this like patriarchy and like the slandering of Wu Zetian. I mean, you can't give her any credit if you're going to slander her, right? So this is where, basically, it was all Tang Gaozong. Wu Zetian was just doing her usual backstabbing in the court. She wasn't part of any of the campaign, and the trouble with that is that, of course, like Tang Gaozong, like at that time he was suffering from his stroke and things, so obviously it was her who was like pulling the strings and making sure the army was fed and all these things. Now the part that kind of saddens me about this is that all the sources I read, they don't tell the story of how she did it, or like what she did to organize the campaign. I can't really find much in terms of literature for that. So if anybody does know, like, what she did and like her contributions and things, and like even the campaign itself, I would love to hear from you, because that's somewhere where I was finding a bit of a gap in terms of like the military side of things. Like what strategies did she use? I mean, was she reading like Sun Tzu's Art of War or Tao Cao's adaptation of it, or even Zhuge Liang's? Like, I don't know, because like none of the sources actually said. They just mention it in passing. Like, oh yeah, by the way, she defeated the Goguryeo too. I'm like, oh really? How? I couldn't really find anything in terms of literature for that. So if anybody does know, then please send me a message and let me know. Now, as well as that, Wu Zetian expanded Tang influence not just to the east into Korea, but to the west as well. And the reason why was to establish a steady flow of trade from that lovely, lucrative Silk Road. The Silk Road trade route did become a little unstable in the early days of the Tang because a plague swept through Asia and into Europe, and then nomads also raided the roads that the caravans travelled through too. And to resolve this issue, Empress Wu established bases all the way through the Silk Road as far as Persia in order to ensure traders were safe. And of course, the result of that would be very significant, as a steady flow of goods from both east to west and west to east means that everyone's profiting and engaging in this trade. And Chang'an became a vibrant city with a population of around 2 million people in it. And I'm summing up here because, like, from what I read, it was like 750,000 people inside the city walls and then another like 1 million outside them. So like, it's like 1,750,000 if you want to be, accurate. And from what I read as well, the foreign population within Chang'an was around 25,000, which is massive for the time. I mean, we're talking it's like the 690s here, and that's a huge foreign population. And like these people have to travel all across the desert to get there, and then like when they get there, they're like, oh, this place is amazing, and they don't want to leave. And again, it's all thanks to Wu Zetian having this open door policy, so to speak, where everyone can engage in trade, and it helped like the country grow basically. And this comes down to not so much military tactics as well. I mean, like, she did build like those bases along the road of like where all the traders were coming along, but as well as that, she did engage in diplomacy brilliantly as well, and she did manage to make marriage alliances with these nomadic tribes to the north, which have always caused China's civilization a headache, especially in the imperial area. And that's when you really see that she's able to engage in military affairs if she needs to, but she would probably prefer the diplomacy route because it's cheaper, and then of course everyone's making more money. And again, it just goes to show that Wu Zetian definitely did have an open mindset. And there's further proof of this as well, because in a mural in Chang'an, or modern day Xi'an, is kind of been excavated. There was a painting or a mural during the reign of the Empress, and it shows Koreans, Mongols, Persian, Greeks, and Indians all visiting Wu Zetian. And it just goes to show how far and wide the Tang dynasty's influence was reaching. And of course, she was welcoming them all with open arms, and they were all free to practice their religion, because obviously you've got Greeks, they're Christians, there's Muslims, and of course there's other religions all coming in too. And there was another part of it as well in terms of the economy and the trading part, element of things. So I read about a story. There was a princess, I can't remember her name, but she had this beautiful hat. And this is the thing, she wasn't even a high-ranking princess. So it just goes to show maybe there was the higher-ranking people were wearing even more luxurious items. But this hat had gold in it from Central Asia or India, the main part of India, the Indian subcontinent. Ivory from Sri Lanka. It had pearls and gems and things all the way from the Arabian Sea, and then it had gold as well. That I've already mentioned gold, but it just goes to show all these different parts of the hat all came from different areas, and that's what these archaeologists found as well. This traveled hundreds and hundreds of miles, and then it was all crafted into this beautiful hat for this not even high-ranking princess. So it just goes to show how wealthy the Tang dynasty was becoming, all under the watch of Empress Wu. So that's the foreign policy and kind of some of the economic goals that the Tang achieved. And then, of course, the other main thing that I kind of got from Wu Zetian's reign was the spread of Buddhism, and of course the acceptance of Buddhism as well. So I have not spoken about Buddhism too much, and that's just because, I don't want to be doing the religion a disservice, because I honestly do not know enough about it to have like episodes about it. Like, I know where it started and things, like I get that, but like I don't know all the individual stories about how it spread to China, and I want to do like dedicated episodes to that in order to do the whole story a service, like a proper good service. But like I've said in previous episodes, Buddhism was had traveled to China. It traveled during the Han Dynasty, and at the time of the Tang Dynasty, it was the biggest religion in China, and it was really taking a grip within Chinese society. And in particular, Wu Zetian was a Buddhist herself, and she knew that the majority of the people were also Buddhist. And of course, it makes sense that she was a Buddhist. I mean, she went away to a Buddhist temple when Li Shumin died, so of course, it's part of the faith, right? And what she did was she managed to basically ensure that Buddhism thrived under her reign. And again, this is a battle with the aristocracy, because they all adhered to the philosophies of Confucius. And you've got this little, I'm going to call it friction between the two faiths. It didn't really get violent or anything like that, but there is a little bit of friction sometimes. And during her reign, because Buddhism is so openly adopted and so openly admired and things by the ruler, Buddhism does spread even further, and it gets to Japan, and then that's when it begins to penetrate Japanese society as well. But to give you an idea of how committed Wu Zetian was to the faith, she commissioned the building of the Great Wild Goose Pagoda in Chang'an. The original pagoda, called the Great Goose Pagoda, was destroyed by an earthquake in the year 652, and it was a devastating blow as it housed sacred Buddhist scrolls. The sacred scrolls that Tang Sanzang, the Buddhist monk, travelled all the way to India to get. The inspiration, by the way, for one of China's classic novels, Journey to the West, which is an awesome story. You could either read the fantasy version of it, which is pretty awesome, and it's pretty funny as well, or you could read the original story, which is also awesome. But I mean, again, that story is going to be an idea for another podcast episode, certainly not for just now. And the new pagoda, which Wu Zetian built, would be much larger than the original, and just much more awesome. Now, to give you an idea, it was built to be as tall as 300 feet, which would have made it one of the tallest freestanding buildings of the time in the world. And of course, it gets kind of dwarfed by Xi'an's high-rising buildings today. And by the way, Xi'an is Chang'an, it's the same city. But just imagine if you were to go back in a time machine. Just imagine Doctor Who parks his TARDIS outside your house and say, let's go back to Tang, China. Then you go back, and you go back to Chang'an. That's what you would see. It would just be this giant pagoda. It'd be towering above everything else. And of course, if you're a Tang citizen living at that time, you would have seen and felt the Empress's dedication to the faith that you are following. And you would have appreciated the awesomeness of the structure as well. And it was a great way for Empress Wu to really appeal to the people of the empire, and it helped her stay in power for longer as well. It helps her claim legitimacy, I've got the will of the people kind of thing as well. Now, another structure that she built for the faith was just outside Luoyang. So I've already spoken about the Luoyang grottos before. That's where people carved little small statues of Buddha, and you've got really large ones of the Buddha as well. And Wu Zetian carves another one into the mountain. But what's peculiar about it is that what she does is she uses, or what the legends say anyway, is that they use her face as the frame to then shape Buddha's face onto it. So it's they're showing Buddha in her image. And then again, it's like saying, "Oh, here's a reminder that this is I'm the one who built this," kind of thing. And but again, it just I think what she's trying to do is she's trying to show the people that she is one for them, basically. And she did an awesome job of it, let's be fair. And now that we've spoken about the spread of Buddhism and things, and the foreign policies, and like the prosperity that people were like experiencing under her reign, now it's time to like tie them both together, which then brings me on to the last point, which is the political reforms that she made. And this is like it's kind of like a top-up, so to speak, on the imperial examination system. So Wu Zetian I think she was very well aware that her talent is what got her to the top. And she recognized that the empire needed new talent. So she kind of just basically topped up the imperial examination system that was already in place. But what she did was she made sure that working people, as in like the regular people, and not just aristocrats who had lots of money, were participating in this exam system. And the two systems that she created were called the Keju, or sometimes the Wenju, and then you've got the Wuju. So the Keju was a system of selecting qualified people through a series of exams, and it's the usual things. It's the classic literary texts, it's the history, and then based on your scores, you then go for the Dianshu, which is like the next level. And this is like the Wu Zetian touch to it, so to speak. And again, this is like the highest of the high examination system. And if you pass that, then you get into the imperial court. And then this is the point, like nobody could get their friends into it. They had to pass these exams in order to get in. Now, of course, there might be some corruption, like, you pay someone and then you could see what you're going to get asked in the test and things, but generally speaking, it was pretty strict in its ruling. That makes us move on to the second examination system, the Wuju. It's similar, but instead of examining the classics, you're just going to examine military affairs and like the military classics, so to speak. And this is, of course, for the army and people who want to get promoted. Then, of course, they would go through this Wuju system. And both of them were critical in getting the state operating on a pool of talent rather than on a pool of bribes. And it was what helped Empress Wu project the power of the empire she was in charge of. And that's what, I think that's what helped her legitimize her rule even further, because, it wasn't just rich families who were doing like the usual. It was like she was bringing people up from the bottom of society and to giving them that carrot basically to try and do well in these exams. Now, another thing that she did, which I think was like a hint of genius, was basically, I want to call it like a postal service, because that's what it feels like. What would happen was you just imagine you've got this post box in the middle of a village, and what people would do, or even the local village governor, they would write a letter, or they would write a report and just say, oh, there's problems here, maybe there's a drought or something, and then that would go directly to the Empress herself, and then she would be reading this. And it's kind of like, oh, that's fan mail, but it's not, because people are just coming to her with problems. And, that's good enough. And, some people would say, well, maybe she didn't even act on them. But there is a lot of evidence to say that she did. Because the people back then, their biggest concerns were usually safety and usually food safety. And what archaeologists are finding now in Luoyang is that under Wu Zetian's reign, huge granaries were built, and they had a system that really improved the existing granary system. And Wu Zetian was able to store 10,000 tons of rice for up to 10 years. And basically, if there was any place in need because of a drought or a famine, which happened in the early days of the Tang Dynasty, she had relief. She was able to send the relief wherever it was needed, and that's when people really prospered under her reign. And of course, now I've spoken about all the good things that she did. However, there is obviously the slander that comes into her reign as well, which we kind of have to discuss, because she did do all these great things, but like I said earlier in this episode, there was a trail of dead bodies behind her. Like, you could have probably made a mountain of corpses after she was, like, finishing her time up. And the reason why she was able to, I would say, outmaneuver a lot of political opponents was due to an extensive spy network. And some people have even argued that postal system she had was a very good way to spy on her enemies as well, because like there might be some guy like he might have got like banished, so to speak, from the imperial court, and then he's making complaints, and then this is where the spy network kicks in and picks up on this guy's complaints, because what could happen is that more people contact him, and then like there could be a rebellion underway, and then she was able to very quickly snap that rebellion out, snuff it out, and make sure it never happened. And then that, of course, helped her maintain her control of the imperial court. But of course, all these good times and all of this backstabbing and things, it would come to an end. And as the Empress advanced in age, she became less interested in state affairs, and she fell in love with two of her concubines, which actually, like, just to give a note, she did have concubines, which again, like, if you're one of those Confucian scholars, you'd be looking at this horrified, because you've got a woman having multiple sexual partners. I mean, it's okay for men to do it, but for women, oh no, you can't be doing that. And Empress Wu Zetian was basically saying, well, I'm the emperor, like, this is what emperors do. So, like, that was her way of, like, really basically saying, women can be equal to men. And again, like, I'm going to try and save that for my conversation with Alyssa when it comes, like, to that. But anyway, she, like, towards the end of her life, she's approaching, like, 70, I think, and she's fallen in love with, like, these two brothers, like the Zhang brothers. They're very notorious. They're known to be, like, conniving, horrible people who just, like, kind of sweet talk the Empress and then, like, do horrible things behind her back. And like, her interaction with these two brothers is seen by the imperial court as, like, a step too far, and what ends up happening is the two brothers do get killed, and then the court forces Wu Zetian to step down, and they bring back her son Ruizong to power, and then, of course, after a year of that happening to her, she died. And now you may feel that the end there was a bit rushed, and you'd be right. And that was intentional. It's because I want to discuss this in more depth with Alyssa from the Remember the Ladies podcast. So I'm going to save it for then, and until next time, thanks for listening.